By day, Vivian Constance was the woman the city told stories about. She walked into boardrooms the way other people walked into their kitchens, unhurried, unbothered, as if the place had been holding its breath waiting for her. She wore tailored dresses in deep colors with clean V-necks, hair long and loose, heels that made a quiet, certain sound on marble. 28 years old, and she had already built the youngest company in the city to cross $1 billion valuation. Reporters called her sharp, brilliant, fearless. They liked a good word. They did not often choose the true one. When evening fell, the woman who had stood on stages all day came home to a penthouse that was very quiet. She slid off her heels near the door because her feet hurt more than she ever admitted. She placed her phone face down on the kitchen counter because it had not stopped glowing all day, and she could not bear the light anymore. She walked past the skyline of Boston blurred by a cold, slow rain, and stopped beside a wheelchair placed near the window. In that wheelchair sat a 7-year-old girl named Matilda Constance. Her head was tilted slightly to the side, her eyes pointed at the city but unfocused, as if she were looking through the rain rather than at it. She was still a beautiful child. Her hair fell in soft dark waves, her hands rested politely in her lap, and somewhere beneath her stillness she was Vivian's daughter, the only person Vivian loved more than the life she had fought to create. But something in Matilda's face had been going out for a long time. Not in one dramatic moment. In thousands of small ones. Vivian knelt down until her knees pressed flat against the floor and her head was lower than the little girl's. She did this every night now. She could not stand above her daughter and feel like a mother anymore. She needed to be lower. Smaller. Closer to where Matilda lived. She rested her hand beside Matilda's, careful not to touch, because touch had come to mean therapy, evaluation, appointments, pain. She looked at the small fingers curled in the lap of the blanket and wondered when her daughter had stopped reaching for her first. On a nearby side table sat a medical file thicker than a novel. Vivian had read every page until she could recite it by heart. Specialists. Second opinions. Third opinions. Names of hospitals in 3 cities. Therapies with hopeful acronyms. The last line on the last page of the newest evaluation still said what the others had said for years. Little change. Prognosis guarded. Realistic expectations recommended. She closed the folder. Tomorrow, she would fight again. Tonight, beside the window, beside the wheelchair, beside the quiet little girl who used to run, Vivian Constance did not know what she was fighting anymore. The sickness, or her own fading belief that belief was enough. Matilda had not been born inside a wheelchair. That was the part almost no one remembered now, because the child in front of them was so quiet that quiet seemed to be her whole shape. But once she had been loud. Once, Vivian had carried a toddler through the hallway of their old apartment at 6 in the morning, with the little girl laughing so hard she could barely breathe, bare feet kicking the air. Once Matilda had drawn on Vivian's important papers with a fat orange crayon, held them up with proud open hands, and waited to be scolded, already grinning because she knew she would not be. She had been 3 years old when the fever came. It started like any fever on any ordinary Tuesday. Warm forehead. Extra juice. A cartoon on the couch. By Wednesday night her skin was so hot Vivian stopped pretending it was ordinary. By Thursday morning the emergency room. By the weekend a small private room with machines that beeped in quiet, polite rhythms and a team of doctors whose faces changed expression when they thought no one was looking. The fever broke. Matilda came home. But something in her legs had changed. At first it was only unsteadiness. A stumble here, a wobble there. Vivian told herself it was the body learning itself again after illness. Then came the falls that had no explanation. Then the months where Matilda held onto furniture to walk from one end of the room to the other. Then the morning she could not stand up at all, and looked at her mother with a confused, almost apologetic expression, as if she thought she had done something wrong. The wheelchair arrived the way a verdict arrives. Heavily, without apology. And it stayed. Vivian poured everything into the fight. The best hospital. The best specialist. A new program in another state. A clinical trial. She flew to other cities just to hear one more expert repeat something close to what the previous expert had said. Months blurred into years. For a while, Matilda tried. She tried so hard, it broke her mother's heart to watch. She let strangers in white coats lift her, bend her, press her, measure her. She smiled small smiles at Vivian after sessions, the kind of smile children give when they want their mothers to feel proud of them. She said the word try when grown-ups asked her to. Then, slowly, she stopped saying it. She stopped asking when she would be better. She stopped asking to go to the park. She answered questions with a nod or a shake of the head instead of words. One evening, Vivian brought home a gift wrapped in silver ribbon, held it out like a prize, and watched her daughter glance at it for less than a second before turning back toward the window. The gift stayed on the table, untouched, all night. That was the night Vivian understood. She was not only losing a battle against an illness. She was losing her daughter to a silence nobody had yet learned to name. Vivian had never been a woman who fell apart in front of other people. She had grown up believing that weakness, shown at the wrong moment, was simply handed back to you later as a lower price, a broken contract, a closed door. She had trained her face to reveal nothing. She had learned to cry only in cars and bathrooms and late-night kitchens, and only when the dishwasher was running loud enough to cover the sound. But Matilda was the first problem in her life her discipline could not fix. In the office, she still moved like a woman who owned her days. She still signed deals. The world outside saw a leader getting stronger with every blow. What the world did not see was how often she gripped the steering wheel in the parking lot of a children's hospital, both hands white-knuckled, unable to turn the key. How often she stood at a bathroom sink at 2 a.m, staring at a face she no longer recognized, asking herself the questions no one answered. Had she been too busy when the first signs appeared? Had she leaned too hard on the experts instead of trusting the small, strange things her daughter's body had been trying to tell her? Had she turned the fight for her child's life into a campaign, cold and efficient, when what her child had needed was a mother who slowed down and listened? The worst part was not the questions. The worst part was the distance. Vivian loved Matilda with a love that frightened her. But years of appointments had trained Matilda to see her mother as the person who came to take her somewhere painful. Whenever Vivian leaned close, Matilda's small shoulders tensed. Whenever Vivian said good morning in a cheerful voice, Matilda's eyes flicked up with a question that cut deeper than any diagnosis. "Where are you taking me today?" There was a meeting with a renowned specialist that Vivian would remember for the rest of her life. He closed Matilda's file gently and looked at Vivian across a polished desk and said, in the kindest voice he could find, that it was time she learned to accept reality. He did not mean to be cruel. He believed he was being responsible. He did not know that those words, said to this woman, landed like a door slamming shut on the one room she had been living in for 4 years. She did not argue. She simply walked out of his office, sat down on a bench in the hallway, and stared at the floor for 20 minutes without moving. That night she signed the papers to expand the Children's Rehabilitation Foundation her company quietly funded. The public would read it as generosity. Only she knew what it really was. A woman who would not stop standing near the fire even after everyone had told her the fire was out, because somewhere in the ashes she still believed an answer was waiting for her child. The rain that afternoon was the cold kind, the kind that made the streets of Boston look like glass and made the lights of every storefront bleed softly into the sidewalks. The Rehabilitation and Activity Center Vivian's Foundation helped support sat on a quiet block near the river. She had not told her assistants she was going. She wanted no entourage, no schedule. She only wanted to see how the place ran when nobody was performing, and although she would not have admitted this aloud, She wanted to take Matilda somewhere that did not smell like a hospital. They arrived in the early afternoon. Vivian wheeled her daughter through the front doors herself. The main hall was bright and warm, with tall windows and low shelves full of books and toys. Other children moved around, some in wheelchairs, some using small walkers, some running in the easy, uneven way of children their age. Matilda did not look at any of them. She looked at the rain on the windows. Vivian pushed her to a spot near the glass and set the brakes. She bent down, kissed the top of her daughter's head, and whispered something neither of them believed anymore, a small promise about fun. Matilda did not answer. The door opened again. A man walked in with a small boy at his side. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair cut plainly, and an open, tired face. He wore a simple jacket, jeans that had been washed too many times, and boots that had clearly walked a lot of floors. There was nothing about him that demanded attention, and yet attention found him. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had stopped trying to impress the world a long time ago. The child beside him was perhaps 6 years old. He was holding the hand of a stuffed rabbit that looked older than he was. The rabbit's ears had been repaired with careful stitches. One of its eyes was replaced by a button. The boy, whose name was Leo, held the toy the way another child might hold a flashlight in the dark. Vivian saw them only in passing. Another father. Another child. She expected this one to glance at Matilda and quickly away. But Henry Dermot was not a man who did that. He saw the little girl in the wheelchair by the window. He saw her mother standing nearby, spine straight, jaw tight in the way that parents of chronic illness learn to carry. He did not stare. He simply noted the angle of Matilda's shoulders, the small tilt of her hips, the careful way she held the blanket across her knees as if guarding something underneath. He helped Leo take off his coat. Leo looked around the room, and his gaze stopped on Matilda. He did not ask his father for permission. He slid his small hand free. He tucked the rabbit under one arm. And, as if pulled by something older than instruction, he walked across the room toward the girl by the window. Leo did not come at Matilda the way most children came at her. He did not point at the chair. He did not ask what was wrong with her legs. He did not look at her mother for approval. He walked straight across the bright floor as if he had been invited, stopped a respectful step away from the wheelchair, and stood there in the serious, unhurried way only small children can. Then he lifted the rabbit in both hands and set it gently in Matilda's lap. It was not a grand gesture. There were no words. He simply placed the rabbit where she could reach it, patted the top of its head once as if introducing an old friend, and took a half step back to give her room. Anyone watching might have missed it. But Vivian, who had trained herself for 4 years to read every flicker in her daughter's face, did not. Matilda went very still. Her eyes, which had been drifting between the rain and the faraway corners of the room, slowly lowered to the small stuffed animal sitting on her blanket. For a long moment, she did not move. She did not blink. Her fingers, which had lain folded in quiet for so long, opened just slightly, and one small hand came to rest beside the rabbit without yet touching it. Her head tilted. Then it tilted a little more. And then, very softly, the corner of her mouth pulled up by the thinnest fraction an expression can pull. A movement so small, only a mother would see it. Vivian felt the air leave her body. She had watched world-class therapists enter her daughter's life, with clipboards and smiles and careful voices. She had watched specialists speak to Matilda in gentle tones and receive nothing back. And here, under the gray rain of an ordinary afternoon, a 6-year-old with a threadbare rabbit had done in 3 seconds what none of them had done in 3 years. Matilda reached out. Just a little. One finger touched the edge of the rabbit's soft ear. Her mouth opened a 1/4 of an inch, as if she had forgotten how to say thank you but wanted to. Leo simply nodded at her the way a small grown-up might nod. He climbed carefully into the chair beside her, legs swinging above the floor, and folded his hands in his own lap as if to keep her company. Across the room, Henry did not approach. He stayed where he was, his jacket over his arm, and watched. He watched his son with the tender pride of a father who had raised a child mostly alone. But his eyes did something more. They moved from Matilda's face down to her shoulders, down to her hips. When she shifted to accept the rabbit, her upper body had tilted in a way that was not symmetrical. Her left leg, under the blankets, had twitched. Not dramatically, but clearly. Henry said nothing. He only watched. And in that watching, he saw a pattern no one had bothered to look for in a long time. Matilda spent the next half hour in a kind of slow awakening. She did not speak. She did not smile in any way a camera would catch. But she held the rabbit in her lap as if it had always belonged to her, and when Leo quietly set a box of crayons between them, she picked up a blue one and, for the first time in weeks Vivian could remember, she drew a small, unsteady line across a piece of paper. Leo drew beside her. Neither child spoke. Neither child needed to. Vivian stood near a pillar, hand pressed to her mouth, afraid that any movement of hers would break what was happening. She did not hear Henry approach until he was beside her. He stopped at a respectful distance. He did not introduce himself like a man with something to sell. He simply stood, hands in the pockets of his jacket, and watched the two children for a long breath before speaking. He said the boy's name was Leo. He said the rabbit had been through a lot. He said it in the easy voice of a parent making small conversation, and Vivian, who had braced herself without noticing, felt her shoulders drop an inch. She told him her daughter's name. She told him, because it seemed right to, that Matilda had not taken to many new people in a long time. Henry listened without judgment. He asked one or two simple questions about how she was doing, the kind of questions parents ask each other when their children are tangled up in the same hard road. And then, very carefully, he said something that made Vivian's breath catch in her throat. He said he had noticed, while Matilda had been reaching for the rabbit, that she favored one side. He said the way her hips shifted when she tried to adjust her weight looked like a body that had been compensating for a long time. He said she had moved her left leg, not much, but enough to notice when she leaned forward. Vivian felt every polite edge of her face harden. She had heard well-intentioned strangers offer opinions for 4 years. She had learned to smile through them and walk away. She almost did it now. But Henry was not offering a remedy. His voice had slowed, not sped up. He said clearly that he might be wrong. He said he had no right to say any of this to a mother who had walked a long road. He said it only because, as a parent, he would have wanted another parent to tell him. Then he said the sentence that would sit in Vivian's chest for the rest of her life. He said quietly that it was possible the doctors had not missed Matilda's legs. It was possible they had missed her pain. Vivian did not speak. The whole room did not speak, although only 2 of them knew that a turning point had just happened. Something inside her, a door she had been holding closed for years, clicked open half an inch, and a cold, bright light came through the crack. She thought of every time her daughter had gone pale before a session. Every time Matilda had pulled her knees up the second a stranger reached for her hip. Every time a report had used the word uncooperative. Every time Vivian herself had whispered, "It's okay, baby," while the little body under her hands had trembled like a creature that had learned that movement was a trap. She looked at Henry. She did not thank him. She could not. She only stared, and in her eyes, for the first time in what felt like an unbearable winter, was something she had not allowed herself to carry. The fragile, terrifying weight of hope. Vivian did not believe him yet. She had learned the hard way not to hand her child's future to a kind stranger. But something in the quiet authority of his voice had cut through her defenses, and she did what she always did when a decision mattered. She looked. Discreetly, over the following evening, she found out who Henry Dermott was. He was not a genius hiding in plain sight. He was not a disgraced doctor or a rising star. He had been a bright pre-medical student at a good university, on track for a medical degree he would never finish. His wife had died when Leah was not yet 2. The grief, the bills, the diapers at 4 in the morning, and the simple, impossible mathematics of being the only parent in a quiet apartment had closed certain doors forever. He had left school. He had taken jobs he could do with his hands in his head, jobs that would let him be home when his son was home. He had drifted toward work that kept him close to children. He fitted wheelchairs for small patients. He adjusted the frames of standing aids. He repaired custom seats for kids whose bodies did not match the equipment their insurance approved. He visited homes where children used walkers and, more often than anyone liked to admit, he was the one who quietly told a parent that a footrest 2 inches too high had been the reason their daughter came home crying every night. It was not glamorous knowledge. It did not come with a framed certificate. But it was the kind of knowledge that lived close to the skin of real bodies. He understood how a seat that tilted even slightly wrong could compress a growing hip. He understood how a child who had felt pain 300 times would begin to brace herself before pain number 301 dart. He understood what the charts called non-compliance and what any parent, if they looked long enough, would call fear. And, Vivian realized, he understood one more thing no specialist could hand her. He understood what it felt like to watch your child hurt and not be able to fix it. He had stood where she stood. When he looked at Matilda, he did not see a case. He did not see a billionaire's daughter. He saw a small girl whose body was telling a story grown-ups had stopped listening to. Vivian sat for a long time at her desk that night, staring at the plain file of information she had quietly asked her assistant to pull. She saw a modest apartment, a single-father household, a man who had never run from his responsibilities and had never asked to be admired for it. His clothes were clean. His son was clean. His son carried a rabbit that had been lovingly repaired instead of replaced. Everything about his life said, "I show up." By the end of the evening, Vivian had made a decision that would have terrified her a week earlier. She called a specialist she had not used before, a careful woman known for looking at whole histories rather than single scans. She asked for a complete reassessment of her daughter's case. Not a cure. Not a miracle. Just a fresh pair of eyes, looking at Matilda the way Henry Dermot had looked at her by the window. The new specialist was a thoughtful woman in her 50s who did not smile easily, but listened the way a good musician listens, with her whole body. She did not start with a scan. She started with a room. She had the lights dimmed to a comfort Matilda could tolerate. She asked Vivian to sit where Matilda could see her face. She introduced herself to the little girl before she introduced herself to the mother. She made no promises. For 2 quiet hours, the specialist watched. She watched how Matilda sat. She watched the small, automatic tilt of her shoulders. She watched the way the little girl's breathing changed when anyone touched the side of her hip. She watched Matilda's eyes when a hand moved toward her leg, and noted the almost invisible flinch that began in the jaw and ran down into the fingers. She checked the alignment of the wheelchair. She measured the height of the footrests. She gently asked Matilda to shift her weight and watched the precise angle at which the little girl's face tightened in preparation for a pain she expected to come. When she finally spoke to Vivian in her small office, her voice was careful. She said the medical picture Matilda's previous charts painted was not wrong. There were real physical issues. There had been real illness. But, she said, there was something else in this little girl's body no chart had named, and it was the thing keeping her from progress. Misalignment in her hips. Chronic compression in certain soft tissues. Years of protective reflexes layered over everything, so thick now that Matilda's body had learned to refuse mint before movement had a chance to hurt her. In other words, the specialist said, this child had not lost the ability to respond the way everyone had been told. She had learned that responding meant pain. And she had learned it so thoroughly that her body now defended itself from healing. Vivian sat very still in the chair across the desk. She felt the words travel through her like cold water. She asked quietly if that meant her daughter had been in pain all these years. The specialist did not rush her answer. She said yes. She said it gently, but she said yes. She said that for a long time, people had been treating a child who could not walk, without seeing that the reason she was not walking was, in large part, that every attempt had hurt her in ways no one had bothered to map. Vivian did not cry immediately. Her hands rested in her lap, her eyes fixed on a crack in the molding across the room. She thought of every morning Matilda had gone quiet in the car on the way to a session. Every evening she had come home too tired to eat. Every night she had lain in bed with her small body curled tight, and Vivian had stroked her hair and said, "You are so brave." She had meant it as love. She understood now that for her daughter, it had sometimes sounded like a sentence. When she drove home that night, she did not go to her office. She did not open her laptop. She went straight to her daughter's room. She knelt beside the small bed where Matilda had fallen asleep in her wheelchair, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and, for the first time in a very long time, she cried without being quiet about it. The real work began the following week. It did not look like a movie. It did not look like anything Vivian had imagined, which was part of what made it believable. The first thing they changed was the pain. Under the new specialist's guidance, Matilda's medications were adjusted. Her seating system was rebuilt. The footrests were set to a different height. Supports were softened at the points where the little girl's body had been quietly bracing. It took 3 appointments to get the wheelchair right, and Henry, without being asked, offered to help on his own time. He came one afternoon with tools in a canvas bag, sat on the floor beside the chair, and adjusted the frame with the same careful attention most people gave their own children's faces. The therapy was rewritten from the ground up. Sessions began with trust, not with exercises. A therapist might spend an entire hour simply sitting near Matilda, showing her how a certain motion would feel before asking her to attempt it, letting her say stop and meaning it when she said stop. Progress was measured not in steps, but in breaths. Leo came along often. No one had planned it that way. It had simply happened, the way some friendships do. He sat on the floor next to Matilda during her sessions and colored in a spiral notebook. He placed the rabbit on the armrest of her wheelchair like a guard. When she had a hard moment, he did not look up and stare. He kept drawing. The simple fact of his presence, not asking anything of her, told her body something it had not been told in 4 years. You are safe. You are safe. You are safe. Vivian changed too. She did not change the way business books told leaders to change. She changed in smaller, braver ways. She stopped asking her daughter, "What did you do today?" She started asking, "Did anything hurt today?" She stopped hoping out loud for the big things. She started noticing the small ones. The afternoon, Matilda let a therapist's hand rest on her knee for a full minute without stiffening. The evening, she asked unprompted for a second slice of toast. The morning, she turned her head when Vivian walked into the room, and their eyes met, and the silence between them was, for the first time in years, not heavy. Between Vivian and Henry, something else grew. Not romance, not yet. Something simpler and, in its way, rarer. The quiet trust that forms between two people who have both been too tired to pretend. He did not try to impress her. She did not try to outmaneuver him. They drank bad coffee together in the center's waiting room and talked about ordinary things. And sometimes they did not talk at all, and the not talking was not awkward. She noticed how he always saved the second cookie for Leo. One afternoon, Matilda rolled herself a short distance across the activity room, picked up a drawing of a crooked yellow house, and handed it to Leo. Not to a doctor. Not to her mother. To another child. Vivian watched from the doorway and pressed her palm against the frame, because she knew, in her bones, that her daughter was coming back. Months later, On a winter afternoon so still the light seemed to hold its breath, they gathered for a session Vivian had asked to be kept small. No cameras. No assistants. No observers. Only the four of them. Vivian, Matilda, Henry, and Leo too. The therapy room had been emptied of everyone else. A pair of short parallel bars stood near the center of the floor, padded at the ends, low enough for a small girl. Matilda sat in her chair at one end of the bars, looking at them as if they were a sentence she had once failed and been asked to try again. She was different now. Not healed. Not fixed. But different. The tightness that had lived in her shoulders for years had eased. Her eyes, when she looked up, reached people. Her hands, when they rested in her lap, were not curled anymore. She still carried fear. But she carried it like something she had learned to hold, rather than something that held her. Vivian stood behind her, one hand on the back of the chair, the other pressed flat against her own chest, as if trying to keep her heart where it belonged. Henry knelt low beside the bars, bringing his face down to the little girl's height. He did not say the word try. He had learned over long months with her, that word lived in a part of her memory where only pain lived. He said, instead, that nothing here was going to hurt her. He said it slowly. He said that if her body did not want to, her body did not have to. He said she did not owe anyone this moment. He said that even if she never stood up, she was already enough. Leo stood a few feet behind, holding the rabbit against his chest, his eyes enormous in the quiet room. Matilda placed her hands on the bars. Her arms trembled. Her shoulders rose the way they used to rise before a session, the old instinct coming back uninvited. For a moment her whole body seemed to argue with itself. She began to lower her hands. She was going to stop. Everyone in the room felt the moment lean towards stopping. Vivian stepped forward just enough for her daughter to see her, and she said with a voice that had no pretense left in it, that Matilda did not have to stand. She said that whether she stood or she sat, her mother was right here. She said it, and meant it, completely, and something in Matilda, some old, hard thing she had been carrying, let go. The little girl gripped the bars. She rose. It was not graceful. Her knees wobbled. Her breath came in short, uneven puffs. Her right leg carried more of her than her left, and her hips adjusted in small, careful corrections, as if her body were relearning an old language one sound at a time. But she rose. Her feet took her weight. Her hands trembled on the bars. And for the space of 5 seconds, maybe 6, Matilda Constance stood. No one moved. Vivian's hand came up to cover her mouth. Tears came down her face the way rain had come down the window months before, without permission, without warning. Henry kept his face steady, but his eyes were red. Leo held the rabbit against his chest and did not say a word because he understood, even at 6, that some moments were not meant to be filled with sound. After a long, trembling breath, Matilda lowered herself slowly back into the chair, still holding the bars as if she were afraid to let go of the evidence. Her chest rose and fell. Her hair stuck to her forehead. Her small hands finally eased off the metal and came to rest in her lap. Vivian knelt in front of her, eyes shining, searching her daughter's face as if she were meeting her all over again. She wanted to say 1,000 things and could not find the shape of any of them. She smoothed a piece of hair away from Matilda's cheek, her fingers trembling like they had not trembled since the first time she had held her as a baby. Matilda turned her head. She looked past her mother to the man who had stayed low and quiet through all of it. And in a voice so small that Vivian had to lean in to hear it, a voice that had barely spoken in 4 years, Matilda said, "It doesn't hurt anymore." 4 words. They landed in the room like something holy. Vivian broke in the way only a mother who has carried too much for too long can break. She pulled her daughter into her arms with a sob that came from a place she had forgotten she owned. She was not a chief executive anymore. She was not a woman who negotiated billion-dollar deals. She was only a mother who had finally heard what her child had been trying to tell her. Henry turned his face slightly away, not because he did not want to witness it, but because some joys are not his to sit in the center of. Leo crossed the room with the rabbit in both hands and placed it in Matilda's lap one more time, as if handing off the last weight she had to carry. They did not leave that afternoon as people who've been cured. Matilda still used the wheelchair. She would still need months, maybe years of patient work. But she laughed at something Leo said on the way out, a laugh short and surprised and entirely her own, and Vivian heard it and understood that her daughter had been given back to her. By the time they stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The late light lay soft and clean across the wet street. Leo walked on Matilda's side, the rabbit between them. Henry and Vivian followed a few steps behind, not speaking, not quite touching, but walking, for the first time in either of their long lives, as if they were going somewhere together. Some things cannot be bought. Some things cannot be scheduled. Some things can only be found by someone willing to look at a child, not as a case or a chart but as a small, brave person carrying a pain no one had yet agreed to name. And sometimes, the thing that has been missed for years is not the illness at all. Sometimes it is only a quiet voice waiting to be heard, whispering at last that it does not hurt anymore.